Let's look at the verb saber and conocer. Okay, both verbs are the verbs that mean to know. There's two ways to say to know in Spanish, saber and conocer. So let's take a look at them. And this is from chapter 3, Estructura 4, on page 102 of your book. Okay, let's look at the two verbs, saber and conocer. Let's conjugate them. So let's start with saber. It's an irregular verb in the yo form. So let's look at the conjugation. Yo sé is I know. Okay, it's yo sé. You must memorize or learn this. And written, the E has an accent mark on it. Yo sé. Tú sabes, you know. Él sabe, he knows. Ella sabe, usted sabe. Nosotros sabemos, and ellos saben. So there's your verb to know. That is how you conjugate it. The yo form is irregular. What does it mean? What does the verb saber mean? Because in English, we don't have two verbs to know, we only have one. Well, in the verb saber in Spanish means to know something factual, to know a fact. I know how many square feet are in my home. I know your address. I know what the weather's going to be like tomorrow. I know a cold front is moving through. Okay, to know something factual. It also means to know how to do something, to have a skill. I know how to weld. I know how to play the piano. I know how to play basketball. Now let's look at conocer. Again, conocer is irregular in the yo form. You must learn it. Yo conozco, I know. Tú conoces, you know. Él conoce, he knows. Nosotros conocemos, we know, and ellos conocen, they know. Now, what does conocer mean? It means to be familiar with something, acquainted with a person. It's generally used with people, that you know somebody, but it's being acquainted with a person. But it can also be being acquainted with a place. It's often used with cities or countries. I know the city of Charleston. Yo conozco Charleston. Um, Yo conozco Denny's. I know Denny's. I've been to that particular restaurant. Yo conozco el parque en el centro. I know the park downtown. And it can also be to know a person, place, or a thing. Now, generally, when we say a thing, it's to be familiar with something related to the arts. Okay, I know the works of Picasso. I know Picasso's art. I recognize it. Or works of literature. I know the books or poems of Shakespeare. I'm acquainted with them. Um, or it could even be to know movies. Okay, I know Hitchcock's movies. So it's being familiar or acquainted. Usually we think of it as knowing a person, but again, it can extend to places. If you've been to Charleston, you know it, or you know the city of New York, you would say Yo conozco New York or Nueva York. If you know, I don't know, a particular, the poems of a particular individual, like I know Shakespeare's poems or his works or Quentin Tarantino's movies. Now, saber and conocer. So let's try to put this into practice. All right. So when would we use saber and when would we use conocer in asking and responding to questions? So let's take a look. Let's look at saber. So we want to ask somebody, do you know my name? Think about it. That's something factual. So it would be, ¿sabes mi nombre? Notice we use saber. What about this one? Do you know how to play the guitar? Now it's having a skill. So you're going to use saber. ¿Sabes tocar la guitarra? Do you know? And we don't need the word how, okay? As in English, how would be como, but we don't use it in Spanish. We just say sabes, and then whatever the verb is. ¿Sabes tocar? Do you know how to play? Or ¿sabes cantar? Do you know how to sing? Whatever the verb action is, you leave it in the infinitive form and you just put it right after the verb saber. So, sabes tocar la guitarra. All right, now you're going to make a definitive statement. I know who he is. Think about this one now. You're not saying that you know him. You may not have ever met him. You're just saying, I know who he is. It's a factual thing. This is where saber can get a little tricky sometimes. And you would say, sé quién es. I know who he is. And I put the he at the end of the sentence. Yo sé quién es. Él. I know who he is. Okay, do you know what my telephone number is? Or do you know my phone? Do you know my telephone number? Think about it. That's factual. Do you know my telephone number? ¿Sabes cuál es mi teléfono? And then we haven't used the word it yet, but I don't know it. If you want to say I don't know it, you're gonna use saber. I'll just give you an example here. No, yo no lo sé. I don't know, and lo is it. Notice I use saber. Okay, what about conocer? Let's take a quick look. You want to ask somebody, do you know Maria? This is different now. You're not asking, do you know who Maria is or anything factual about her? Do you know her? Are you acquainted with her? You're going to use conocer. Conoces a Maria, and we're using the to form, so it's conoces a Maria. Notice that with the verb conocer, when you use conocer with a human being, a person, and this is in your book, when you use it with a person, you have to put the preposition a. It's called the personal a because it has to do only with persons right before the name or the mention of the person. So it's not conoces Maria, it's conoces a Maria. You always use the personal a with conocer when you are talking about a person. All right. Now, if I asked you, do you know Charleston? Conoces Charleston, the city. That's not a person, so I don't use the personal a. So if I wanted to ask you, do you know Charleston? Like, have you ever been there? I would ask you, conoces Charleston? So no personal a. Please look at that. It's a very simple concept. It's on your exam, but very simple. You only use the personal a with conocer, and only when you're referring to a person, not a place or a work of art. Yes, I know her very well. Okay. So again, if you're going to say, I know her, you would say, or you could say, I know Mary. You could say, sí, yo conozco a Mary. Now, I've got it here as I know her, yo la conozco. Notice though, I respond back with conocer, not saber, because I'm saying, yes, I know her. I'm acquainted with her. Okay. Do you know Charleston? There's the question. ¿Conoces Charleston? Again, you can use conocer with places, parks, restaurants. You're asking, have you ever been there? Are you acquainted with the place? And the person answers, no, I don't know that city. No, yo no conozco esa ciudad. I answer back with conocer. And now here we're looking at movies, maybe books, works of art. Here we're looking at movies. So do you know Hitchcock's movies? ¿Conoces las películas de Hitchcock? All right, let's do some exercises with saber and conocer. Let's see how we can do on this one. Here we're asking, we want to know, is it saber or conocer? We're asking in the to form. Do you know, donde means where, do you know where my uncle lives? Again, your word order is a little different in Spanish. We would say, do you know where uh, my uncle lives? We'd put the live at the end, but not in Spanish. So do you know where my uncle lives? Okay, what kind of question is that? Is that a knowledge question or an acquaintance question? Okay, and it's a knowledge question. Do you know where he lives? He lives on 16 East Main Street. It's just a factual thing. So, sabes tú. All right, let's look at this one. You're asking, Tu a mi tia Wanda. Now you're asking what? Do you know my Aunt Wanda? Okay. All right. Do you know her? Are you acquainted with her? Of course, we're going to use conocer. We use it with people. Are you acquainted with her? Do you know her? And notice, do you know a mi tia Wanda? You always put an a before the name of the individual or any reference to a person when you use conocer with a person. All right. Do you know who is the professor of the class? Do you know who he is? Do you know who is the professor of the class? Think about it. Am I asking you, are you acquainted with him? Have you met him? I'm just asking you, do you know who he is? Something factual. Something factual. ¿Sabes tú quién es el profesor de la clase? Yes, the professor is Mr. Brown. I've never met him, but I know that's who he is. All right, look at the next one. Do the students know the new professor, al profesor nuevo? Do they know him? That's an acquaintance question. Do they know him? Are they familiar with him? So it's going to be conocen. And look, do they know him? So if you use conocer, you have to follow it with the preposition a before the reference to the person. So conocen a el profesor nuevo. Remember, a plus el, when el means the, contracts to al. There's only two contractions in the Spanish language, de plus el, del, and a plus el when el means the, al. 5. Who knows cuál es mi programa de televisión favorito? Who knows what my favorite television program is? Who knows what it is? Is that a factual thing or is it an acquaintance thing? It's a factual thing. Do you know what it is? My favorite program is whatever it might be, The Walking Dead. So it's going to be saber. ¿Quién sabe? Look at 6. Who knows the program Breaking Bad? Now look at this. Who knows that program? Now, this is not a factual thing. It's, are you acquainted with it? Who knows it? Who's seen it? Who's familiar with it? So, conocen. And notice I don't use an a here because el programa Breaking Bad is not a human being. And 7. Yo no, so I don't know how to speak Spanish. That's a factual thing, a skill. So we use saber. Yo no sé hablar español. I don't know how to speak Spanish. And let's do these quick exercises here. Let's try to translate these into English. Do I know you? Say you run into somebody at a party. Do I know you? Okay. Do I know you? Let's take a look. Do I know you? Is it a factual thing or is it a familiarity thing? This would be a familiarity thing. Have I met you? Do I know you? Am I familiar with you? Te conozco. Te conozco. This is a little advanced for us right now because we haven't learned these pronouns. Let's move on to the next one. Do you know what time the class is? Do you know when the class is? Do you know what time the class is? That's a factual thing, right? Is the class at 7, 1? So you're going to use saber. So, sabes tú a qué hora es la clase? Does Bob know how to drive a car? This is a skill. Does he know how to drive a car? So we're going to use saber. Sabe conducir un auto. Bob, conducir means to drive. You often will hear manejar. So sabe manejar un auto. Bob. Again, the word order here is a little interesting, but the important thing to notice is that you use the verb saber. We could have said sabe Bob conducir un auto, but in Spanish we can put Bob at the end of the sentence. Okay, do they know Richmond? And I mean the city of Richmond. Is that a factual thing or an acquaintance thing? It's an acquaintance thing. Are you acquainted with the city of, have you been there? So conocen. And does she know your father? Does she know your father? Does she know your mother, your sister? In other words, has she met them? Is she familiar with them? And so we use conoce. Conoce ella. Now, not tu papa, but a tu papa. Remember when we use conocer with a person, we have to put that personal a out in front of the reference to the person. Does she know Mary or does she know Bob? Conoce ella a Bob? And then let's look at this last one, just a brain twister. I know the vice president, but I don't know who the president is. So here we're saying, I know the vice president. That's going to be conocer. I'm familiar with him. I've met him. But I don't know who the president is. But I don't know who the president is. And that could possibly happen. You don't know the factual thing, so it's going to be saber. So it's conozco al vicepresidente, pero no sé quién es el presidente. So we've reached the end of this presentation. Thank you.